How do you help your children deal with bullies? Um, and this particular verbally bullying, um, physical bullying is probably much the same. I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. But the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about dealing with bullies is Max Lucado's book, You Are Special. And it's a great book for kids because it talks about um, the characters in the book are all wooden people, so it's this imaginary place. Um, and they're a picture of humanity in their little village, and they give each other black dots for things that they think are silly or foolish or bad, and they give gold stars for things that they think are good and beautiful and praiseworthy. And so the main character is covered with dots, and people give him dots just because he's already got lots of dots, and he's very discouraged. So, like, those dots are bullying, and those bullying comments, and he's just covered with them. And then one day he meets another wooden person who has no dots at all. But she also doesn't have, she also doesn't have any stars. And he's just like blown away. I'm like, how, how does this work? And she's, well, go talk to Eli. He's their creator. He carved all the wooden people. So he's the creator. Go see him. And so finally he gets up the courage to go up the hill and see the creator. And he gets there, and of course he's very intimidated because he's this little wooden person and it's this giant workshop. But he talks to the creator, and what he learns is that the dots or the stars only stick if you let them. And so it's just a beautiful lesson of, if what people say to you doesn't matter to you, then it doesn't have that impact. And so it's a beautiful lesson, and it also brings up in me that, like, well, that's great, but how do I not care? How do I not let it stick? That's beautiful. If I could just not let any of it stick. And so what the person with no dots or stars says is she spends time with Eli every day, with their creator. And so, like, for kids, that's a great, like, spend time with God every day. But more practically, like, what are you doing in that time? And how is that helping you not care what people think? Well, it's spending the time hearing what he has to say. So looking at scriptures, spending time actually asking God, what do you like about me? Like, this person said this about me and it hurt. What do you think? And he will answer them. And they can start building that relationship. And they have to choose that what he thinks about them, that they believe that what he thinks about them is more important than what other people think about them. And so it's building that strength on the inside. And, scripture tells us to take every thought captive. That's a skill. And it takes practice to, how do I recognize that here's a thought and now I get to choose? Am I going to take it in as part of who I am and part of what I believe? Or am I going to reject it and bring that through the filter of, what does God say about me? And sometimes the things that people say, very often, they're very hurtful because they feel true. Because they, I don't know, our spirits, or maybe the enemy is helping them, or whatever, pick up on those weaknesses and those areas that we feel insecure. So when they say it, it feels true. But we have to be able to take it captive. Okay, this feels true. This is what I'm thinking, but how do I filter and decide if it's really true? And, helping your kids work through, like, if this feels really true, why is that? Is there a lie that they're believing about themselves? Is there a lie that they're believing about God? So that this thing can hurt so much more, instead of just falling off. Like, the stickers just fall off this girl because she doesn't care. if somebody gives her a dot or a star, because she knows what her creator thinks of her. So, um, and then as one last thought on that is the analogy, and this could be a fun, like hands-on things for your kids to get this truth too. Like you can read the book, um, but it's the water that gets inside a ship that sinks it, not the water around it. It can be in the whole entire ocean of water and it's fine. It actually needs that water to float. But if the water gets inside, that's when the ship sinks. And so if we have a toy boat or make a paper boat or whatever, like it's fine until the water gets inside. And so how do they build up those defenses to get the water out? And how do they start to recognize them, like, oh, I let some of that in again. How do I get it back out? You get it back out by telling yourself the truth. You get it back out by talking to someone who you know loves you and is going to tell you the truth and affirm you and encourage you, and start teaching them those things so that they can block up those holes where the water gets in, and know how to get that water back out again. Let me check comments. Bullying stole my granddaughter's life. She developed mental illness and took her own life. Except the letter that if only everybody would love everybody. It's very, very true. And it also can help your kids' perspective to see, like, what has probably happened to those bullies so that they think that that's an okay way to treat people, or that they feel like that's what they need to do to be okay. Not that it makes the behavior okay in any way. It just helps to create some compassion and see, like, oh, okay, it's not about me. It's about the pain and everything that's going on in them. It's not about me. And another reason that's super important is because, well, yes, we want to stop all the bullying and fix the bullying in the world. We don't control the bullies. We only control us on a good day. So what are the things that I can do so that the things, please don't interrupt me, okay? What are the things that we can do to keep that water from getting in and sinking our ship? Because we cannot control these. Sometimes we can control our exposure to them, and the less reactive we are, the less fun it is for them, so they'll move on to a new target. You need to go find something to do, okay? Not while I'm on the call. Okay, this is the last. So yeah, building up those skills so that they're not as easy of a target, and so that they can have that compassion, like, okay, you're being mean to me because you're hurting. And they don't need to say that, because that they're just going to get picked on again. Probably, but they can know that for themselves and just be like, yeah, I don't need to let that in because it's not about me. Let me know if that's helpful or if there's more questions from what I shared. What can you do? Next question is, what can you do to help others heal? So a lot of us have grown up in homes where we were told that we were responsible for other people's emotions and well-being. You make me mad. You make life so hard for me. Why do you have to make this difficult? All these kinds of messages that made it seem like we were responsible for others, and possibly even the adults in our lives, of how they were. And so we could, somehow control that and fix that by how we behaved. It's not true. Like, yes, our behavior has an impact on people, but they're in control of them. It's like, they're in control of what water gets in their ship, what stickers stick to them. And especially as children, like, they are there to help us manage our emotions and learn how things function, not the other way around. So it's an illusion that you can heal someone else, or cause someone else to feel bad or have a horrible life or whatever. So, in trying to help someone else heal, that's the first most important thing, is realize that the only way you can help is if they decide to ask for help. Unsolicited advice is rarely heeded. So make yourself available, be encouraging, speak life, tell them what you see in them and that potential there, but um, you're not, there's nothing you can do to change them. You can help create an environment where change is possible. You can help encourage, um, but you cannot change them. So the best thing you can do is to change yourself, so that if they do ask, you're like, well, this is what worked for me. I understand where you're at. Here's some ideas. Um, and be that example and be that encouragement and be a healthier person yourself, so you can change the dynamic with, like, especially as moms, you want to heal your kids, you want to fix them. And it gets extra tricky as a mom because you can feel like I did all this damage in the first place. I should be able to fix it. But that's how you fix it, is by healing and being able to show up as a new, more emotionally mature, more healthy person to interact with than you were when you did the damage. So healing yourself is how you can be most helpful for others to heal. Another question was, how do you limit the impact that the world has on you? Like, there's been a global pandemic. If you watch the news at all, it has been in your face for almost 2 years now. Daily death counts, daily sickness count. Like, we've never done that before. We've never lived in this before. Like, we've never had, oh, it's flu season and here's how many more people are sick today, or cancer count, or heart attack, or like, there's never been a time in history where we have had a daily count in our face, or sometimes hourly when this whole thing started, of how many people were sick and potentially dying. It's just crazy. And then there's been the rioting over racial issues, and then there's been the issues with um, personal sovereignty and medical rights and the political stuff. I mean, it's been intense and crazy. And as Christians, we're called to impact our world, but we also can't stay completely plugged into it, or it's just too overwhelming and too much for our systems to handle. Like, we have to have ways to shut it out, kind of like, with your ship. How do you shut out this stuff and keep it from sinking your ship? So first of all, if you get clear on what God expects of you, does he expect you to be praying? Does he expect you to be giving financially? Does he expect you to be actively involved in any of these issues? And be clear on that for yourself. And it's going to be different for everybody, of what that level of involvement is, what that level of prayer engagement is going to be different for everybody. So it's between you and the Lord. What is he saying you need to be doing about different issues in this season? And then so being clear, what does he want you to do with it? And so, I don't know, the most recent example I can think of was, I don't know, maybe last weekend, Super Bowl weekend, I think. Like, the Super Bowl has tons of issues around it. I mean, it's a sporting event that people love, but there's tons of human trafficking around it, tons of prostitution and things that happen with that around that weekend and in that city on that weekend. The Freedom Convoy up in Canada had something like, they're being attacked and misrepresented and threatened and rights taken away. And there was, I can't remember now, there was I think at least two other like pretty big things that weekend, like spiritually heavy, oppressive things. And um, just like was really hit with like a spirit of grief. I'm like, God, this is so heavy. And he's like, but it's not yours to carry. And so I just quickly prayed through, like, God, I give this back to you. Like, here's what I'm seeing and feeling. And I trust you and I know you're working. So I give it back to you and I'm not carrying it. And it can be helpful to like, I mean, maybe write it down, maybe write it down and put it in a box and you put the box on the shelf. You can just like imagine putting it all in a box and putting it back on the shelf, um, putting it at Jesus' feet, taking it to the cross, whatever um, is helpful for you to remind yourself this is God's. I've done my part. I asked him what I'm supposed to do. I've done my part and now I'm giving it back to him. And if there's particular things that are really persistent of like, okay, I've given it back, but it still is just pulling on me, dig into why, what are you letting that say to you? Like, is there an unreasonable fear of dying or someone you love dying or um, something else where you're just letting, where the enemy is harassing you about what's going on and breeding fear instead of you being able to stay in a place of faith and trust. And go back to the scripture, like he tells us again and again to not be afraid and to not be in fear. And instead of like just, I can't be afraid, I can't be afraid, I can't be afraid. Look at why. Why does he tell us not to be afraid? It's because he's with us. It's because he's working all things for good. It's because he wins in the end. And so find people that are sharing that message and that are sharing the things God is doing here and now, the difference that he is making, the places the church is growing, the places that revival is happening. Like it's out there, but you have to turn off the mainstream news to find it. And to find people who are like, yes, I see, because they don't want a Pollyanna, like, God is good, it'll all be good, I just live in my little bubble. But we also can't live over in the fear. We like be in the middle of, I see there are bad, awful things, scary things happening. And I know God is working. I know it will be good. I know he will use this for his glory because that's what he does. So finding places that remind you of that perspective so that everything doesn't feel so heavy and getting a long-term perspective. I think especially in our Western culture, we're taught to like live right now, which is important. It's important to be in the present. But it's like right now, all about my life. Right. Just right now. Or even my life as a whole. But what about the generations? Like generations have come before us that have gone through horrific things and kept their faith in God. And there's generations coming. And there's times where it seems like, no, this has got to be the end. This can't go on for generations. But every generation of believers, I think, has seen things to be like this. It can't get any worse. But having that longer perspective that Paul talks about these momentary and light afflictions as he has been beaten within an inch of his life multiple times and has to live on the run and be in prison and threats of death, these things both from religious people and from the government, light and momentary afflictions, because for eternity it's good. For eternity it's perfect. And so just kind of shifting some perspective of what am I looking at? Am I looking at this right now and what man and the enemy wants to do, and it seems they're succeeding? Or I step back and go, okay, it doesn't matter what it looks like because I know God is not a liar. I know his word is true. Um, and then the last question that I had ahead of time was I had asked earlier in the week if you felt like you had a hole in your soul. And I actually got that term, like it totally resonates with me. But I got that term from a book called Into Abba's Arms. And it's a book that I was first introduced to about 20 years ago. And she starts off talking about like feeling like you have holes in your soul. Like it doesn't matter how hard you try, how much you pray, the Bible studies you do, the quiet time, the serving at church, like all the different things. Like it still feels like even if God's love comes in, there's all these holes, it just rushes right back out again. And like I've heard the analogy of um no, sorry, different analogy. But like if you're trying to get water in the bucket, but it's got holes in it, like you can keep pouring the water in and pour faster and faster, or you can try and plug up the holes, mend the holes. So those holes happen in our soul from just from wounds in we're almost always wounded by people because we're designed to be in relationships. So it's people that we're in relationship with and that we care about that hurt us, and that's not fun. Um, so it's those things that people said that make that hole in the boat so the water can get in and sink it because it feels true, and maybe there's nobody there to tell us it's not true. Maybe it's the very people who should be teaching us to plug the holes that are making them. And sometimes that's happening because a lot of it happens when you're young and the enemy is right there to take advantage of it and make that hole bigger and make it into something that it wasn't. And we have childlike thinking. We think the world revolves around us as children. And so if something goes wrong, it had to have been our fault. It had to have been because of something we did. And like I said, the enemy is right there to jump on that and make sure that that's what we believe and make that an opening that he can get in and harass us with. So as to me, the holes in our soul, and I guess to clarify from some conversation too, my understanding is that our spirit is what is reborn. Our spirit is eternal. Um, that's that's the true us, I guess, that's created in the image of God that will live with or without God forever. If our spirit has been reborn, we will live with God forever. And so our spirit is reborn. Our spirit communicates with Holy Spirit. We also have a soul, and that is our mind, will, and emotions. So what we're thinking about things, what we're feeling about things, how we're acting, all of that is in our soul. And I don't know for sure whether our spirit can get damaged or not, but I know for sure that our soul gets damaged by the things people say, by the things we tell ourselves, the things that happen to us. And that's where those holes get created. And if you have a place in your life, a place in your thinking or emotions where you know this is what God says is true, but you don't really feel it, there's a hole. And we fix that hole by sometimes we need to know where the hole came from. Because there's unforgiveness allows the enemy access to us. So if we don't know where it came from, we don't always know who to forgive. But if it seems like it's way too scary to figure out where it came from, just ask the Lord who you need to forgive. Um, Or if it seems really scary to go to that place, don't go there alone. Like, that's something I do with my clients, um, counselors, other prayer ministries, things like that, um, where you can safely see where that hole was made and see what the Lord really thinks. Ask Him to speak that truth to you, um, because His truth is what plugs those holes. So if you've got a wound in your soul that tells you that you weren't important enough to spend time with, or that you weren't important enough to top the to-do list, like there's always things to do, um, then what does the Lord say about that? You can forgive whoever taught you that. It was your parents, maybe it was one parent, maybe you had significantly older siblings and it was them, but you can forgive them because they were doing the best they could with what they had, and you're commanded to forgive. And then you can receive, like, God, what do you say about me? It's like, well, I'm with you all the time. You're important to me. I always have time for you. And that fills up that hole. And you have to choose to hang on to it. You have to choose to believe it, even when it feels like I'm just not important enough. And you have to choose, no, God said this is true, that He loves to be with me and He always has time for me. And He's God and He has time for me. So that's the truth I'm holding on to fill in that hole. And if you need more help on anything like that, like I said, that's what I do for my clients, is walk you through um, that process of healing up those holes, finding why they're there, walking through the forgiveness, having compassion for yourself and for what you have experienced, both in that and as the ramifications of that, and to bring in God's truth and healing in that. So I'm going to check comments and see if anybody has asked any questions. If I can figure out the technology to let me do that. It won't let me scroll. So I'm assuming that nobody asked any questions live. You can ask questions on the replay, and I trust that there was something in here that was helpful for you. And in March, well, and I guess I was going to start in March, but I started it today. I'm doing the videos here in the group, and I'm also doing them out on Facebook. And good job. And on YouTube. So if there's someone you know that's not on Facebook or not in this group that needs something you heard um, in one of our videos here, you can share that, the Facebook link, or the YouTube link. And if you happen to be watching on YouTube, you can join our Facebook community, which we're building to be a non-judgmental, non-condemnation, no shame place to share where you're struggling and to get the encouragement to grow and help heal up those holes and to help support you as you raise those world changers God has given you. So I'll put links to all those things in the comments, and we'll see you in the next video.